put Europe in perspective, I think it's important to emphasize that the Greek crisis is a huge red herring. The media has blown out of all proportion the systemic risk that Greece might pose to Europe. The size of the Greek economy is less than 1.7% of the total Eurozone. The Greek problem has been festering not for months, but for years. The major banks in Europe that had loans outstanding to Greece, and in particular French and German banks, have written off those loans years ago. They set up reserves against them. And so in the recent crisis negotiations that took place, even though the Greek government thought they had significant leverage and thought that the rest of Europe would be worried if Greece were ejected from the Eurozone, the fact of the matter is that we got to a point where what happens to Greece in a technical sense in terms of how it would affect capital markets, how it would affect consumer confidence in the rest of Europe, was grossly exaggerated. So putting Greece aside for the moment and thinking about Europe in general, the situation is stabilizing. The worst of the European crisis is over. Earlier this year, the European Central Bank introduced their form of quantitative easing. It was quite aggressive. It led to weakness in the euro. That happened to coincide with pronounced weakness in commodity prices, and in particular oil. And so those two factors have been very helpful to European corporate profits because they do export a lot. And so we are seeing European profits beginning to increase, and we're beginning to see consumer confidence return, and we're beginning to see economic activity rise to around about maybe 1%. There's also a very important development taking place in the southern part of Europe, in the countries which have for many years struggled to keep up with the competitiveness of German industry. And I'm referring to structural changes that have taken place, especially in Spain. But there's a new government in Italy under a man called Mr. Renzi, and he is also putting in place some very sensible changes, and the Portuguese situation has improved. As we look at Europe, those countries have made the greatest progress. I should also include Ireland, whereas interestingly, France is the one that now has been dragging its feet most. The international portfolio that we manage has limited exposure in Europe. We have some wonderful European companies, but these are global and international companies that simply have, if you like, European nationality. There are a number of developments in Europe, structural changes that need to change going forward. Probably the most important one is a pickup in investment in high-tech areas. It's striking if you contrast the situation in the United States, which has got an extremely vibrant economy where creative destruction is very much alive and well. In Europe, you have a much more generous social safety net, and so the impact of raw capitalism is somewhat muted in Europe. You don't get the sense of urgency in the corporate world that we see in the best managed US companies. We also need to see far more labor deregulation in Europe. Unemployment is still very high. Part of the reason for that high unemployment is the barriers that exist to the redeployment of labor. We need to see more further progress towards the creation of a genuine banking union, and in due course the creation of a genuine European fiscal budget. We're not there yet. By no stretch of the imagination do we have a United States of Europe, but that is the long-term objective.